he was sent here to relax me. He's done a great job. That guy. I think they got business first. Well,
But that's which one? Sound.
Then I'd suggest you do so before I speak, and then you can just say, come on, put down.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our monthly meeting. So, is it possible to everybody to get seated, and we'll try and get started. Well, welcome to our meeting, and we hope that you find the topic tonight of great interest. Some people here I don't know, so are there a number of people here who are particularly involved with the Lobethal Museum? Any hands up? There's a few people here that are interested there. Good, so welcome to you. The meeting tonight is being live streamed, and we thank our operators up there for making things work. And if people can't see the live stream, they might be able to watch it on YouTube subsequent to tonight. But welcome also to those people who may be watching the presentation live stream. Okay. Yeah, we missed that one. Yeah. So if you might recall, last month we had our annual meeting at the start of the evening, and the election of committee members remained unchanged from the previous year, apart from one not seeking re-election. And at our most recent committee meeting, then we appointed office bearers. And there's no change there either. So you'll have to put up with me for another year. So there's a few announcements before we get on to our speaker, but certainly welcome to Andrew Zilm, who'll be speaking to us shortly. You'll find out on the table out here some forms about the Friends of Lithuanian Archives Annual Research Fellowship. If you're interested, or if you know somebody who is interested to pursue this, there's lots of information on there, and you can put an application in through the appropriate means. So these information sheets are out there and will also be promoted at some future events. Now, who am I getting to speak first? Lois or Peter? Oh, I will. Okay. Welcome to Lois.
Okay, good evening. And of course, you all realise that next month, May, is our, used to be called History Month, it's now called History Festival, but it's still a whole month, packed full of events you should be going to. And I hope you've already picked up from a supermarket or your local library the big printed program, or looked up the program online and searched for Lutheran or German in that huge program to find all the things that you'll be fascinated by. So I've said there will be a lot of work for you next month, for all of us next month. And first of all, I'd like to announce the actual FoLA meeting for May will be here in a little over a month's time on the 23rd of May. Ben Hollister, one of our archivists, will be speaking to us. Ben is the expert. No one knows more about the Germans who lived in the city. As you know, in the 19th century, most Germans, most Lutherans lived in the country. The Lutheran Church was a rural church. Even its presidents and all its administrators lived in some village somewhere, or perhaps even in a town. But there were Germans and Lutherans living in the city, often tradespeople, business people, and so on. And Ben Hollister is the expert. He's been looking up whoever was here and where they lived, and he's been organising walks around the city, the different quarters of the city, pointing out the different businesses and homes of people. And he's chosen some pubs, pastors and politicians to talk about. A nice combination. Lutherans are not temperance people. That talk will be here on the 23rd of May by Ben Hollister. Then that is getting near the end of the time that the History Month, but we hope you're not exhausted yet, because we've got a little event from Bethlehem congregation. One of the pastors in the city will be featured in a talk, a Sunday afternoon talk on the 26th of May about Pastor Michael, the first real pastor of the Bethlehem congregation. And Gillian Micken has flyers, and she has been handing them out, and that will make a nice finale to May for you. Sorry? Who will be the speaker? Okay, I will be the speaker. And it's somebody whose name is virtually unknown, and yet there is so much to know about him that I won't fit it all in on that afternoon. So come along and find out. But we start in great fashion with the German Heritage Research Group annual seminar. We've been running these for over a dozen years by now, and for some years we've been holding them, been hosted by the Barossa German Language Association at the Langmile Church Complex. It's a whole day, a feast of stories that we have called Broad Horizons, South Australian German stories from the wider world. It's people, South Australian Germans, who came from far-flung places or went on to far-flung places. And there'll be lots of short, unexpected and new stories for you to hear there. There is a registration form available for you. Peter Micken has some as well, and the table here, so you can pick that up, get all the details on the Saturday, the 4th of May, so you need to get in quickly about that one. Sorry? Right, yes. There you are. Good. So you can check that with Chris too. And on the back of that, you will find the beginnings of the Barossa History Fair. The first event will be a dinner on the Saturday night at the Vine Inn. Many of you will know the Vine Inn, the legendary Vine Inn at Nuriutpa. There will be a history talk by South Australia's history ambassador, and there will be the launch of a book about the Vine Inn, and of course dinner. So that's also something that you could look forward to on the Saturday evening as you want to relax after your inspiring talks at the seminar during the day. And then the next day, there is the Barossa History Fair, a whole lot of different events throughout the day in different locations in Tanunda throughout the day, a guided tour around the churches by Ev Lesky, a tour about the town by Don Ross, all acknowledged experts here, and many other interesting talks, music, bands, stands, events, lots of things to entertain you, crafts, etc. Lots to entertain the whole family for that day. So pick up all of these flyers before you leave here if you haven't already received them as a FoLA member. Now, have I done with the evening? That's May. Well, let's see. It's a great feast. Enjoy it. So, to tonight, to introduce Andrew Zilm, our speaker for tonight. I first encountered Andrew at the Genealogy Society German Interest Group meeting. He was talking, very much involved in family history, and particularly interested in and sort of bothered by photographs, scanning photographs. You have all of these photographs from your family, and you identify them, try and work out where and when and who, and then you end up with somebody you just cannot identify. How do you go about it? He discussed this at a meeting there. I next encountered Andrew when he came along to a book sale, our first great book sale at Lutheran Archives. And, well, he said something about volunteering. So he's been there ever since. Also working on photographs and digitising photographs for Lutheran Archives. It's an absolutely essential job. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photographs that need digitising to a very high standard. So he's working in a field that he's been quite familiar with. In the meantime, however, he had got entangled with Lobethal Museum. Andrew grew up in Lobethal. He went to primary school, played footy in Lobethal, on what he has been now since then been shocked to discover that the primary school footy field was once the cemetery. It didn't shock him at the time, but there you are. So, and it was a football reunion that got him entangled with someone from the committee of the Lobethal Museum, and so he started going up there and really investigating, looking at what was there, what documentation there was there, becoming fascinated with the story of the museum, and wondering about the various bits and pieces he was finding, trying to check the provenance, where had they come from and what was their story, and all sorts of things like that. And he started talking about those in our lunchroom at the archives, and I pricked up my ears. And I was present at the opening of the Lobethal Museum. My father was from Blyth, but he drove all the way to all sorts of interesting, significant church events. He had 2 brothers that were pastors. He had cousins and nephews and sons who were pastors. So he was interested in important church events, so he drove us to Lobethal for this event. He himself had spent some of his primary schooling at Lobethal, because in Blyth we did not have a Lutheran school, and so he had to be sent somewhere to learn some German at a Lutheran school. This was back in the early 1900s. So he had a great attachment to Lobethal, and so I ended up there sitting and looking at these dignitaries at the opening of this museum. So I started taking notice of what Andrew was saying and what he was asking, and we started chatting about it, and I would quiz him about this and about that, and I discovered how much he knew about it. So I decided, this is a story most of us don't know the details of. We might have heard of Jonas Vanagas, but have we ever thought about who he was, what he was doing, what he was trying to do there? We invited him to come along and tell that story, and I'm sure you're going to appreciate it and find it very interesting. Please welcome Andrew Zilm.
No, are we switched on? Yep, we're switched on, Ben. Thank you. Thanks, Lois. Evening, everyone. Oh dear. This is nothing like teaching a Year 12 PE class, I can tell you. Yeah, look, thanks again, Lois. It's been really interesting volunteering at the two venues, firstly at the Lobethal Museum, which as a kid growing up in Lobethal, I never went to. I was a Presbyterian, even though my dad's family with the surname Zilm were Lutheran. On the other side, my mum family came from Newcastle on Tyne, so they were Geordies. And I think I get the story that as a compromise, rather than Church of England and Lutheran, we went down the Presbyterian path. And consequently went to the public school, not the Lutheran school. And as Lois said, the only time we went on Lutheran grounds was when we had a sporting exchange. And yeah, through my involvement with the Lobethal Museum, I shudder to think on whose bones I trod on retrieving a footy or bowling a cricket ball. So, interesting stuff. But that's the point where here, when you're working at the museum, you can't help but learn about this bloke called Jonas Vanagas. His legacy is everywhere. And when I first took on the task of doing an update of the items in the museum, it was kind of frustrating because apart from an audit that was done in 93, 94, the records of what the museum held were somewhat haphazard. And there were lots of items, both old items and not so old items, that the museum had for ages, and some stored in boxes that people who visited the museum never got to saw, that just weren't registered. So I took on the task of trying to find, everything, starting again, and registering everything. If it had an old registration number, it kept it, but if it didn't have a number, couldn't find a number, I'd give it a new one. And I was always frustrated that I couldn't ever find any kind of like registers until doing the research, which we'll come to later, I found that Jonas, being the person that he is, and hopefully you'll discover who he was, he meticulously documented everything. And we'll get around to seeing his initial list. Well, you won't get to see it because it's very faint. The typing has faded over the years, but we'll try and see how we go. Apparently my clicker's not working, so when I say next slide, Ben's going to hopefully push the right button. So, next slide. Just about the presentation. Some of the slides will feature letters and news articles on or about Vanagas and Lobethal. I don't expect you to read them, so what I've done is tried to draw excerpts from them to highlight Vanagas's role. So I'll show you the letter, but you won't, it's very small, and if there's something that I think is important about Vanagas, hopefully on the next slide I'll have blown it up or written a bigger font so that you can see. Next roll, next. On the front desk, I've brought along some of Vanagas's publications, and the LAM, or Lobethal Historical Museum, we've done just recently an update reprint of Vanagas' book that he finished in 1954. So you're welcome later on to have a look through that. The original book is here, that he published in 1954, but I ask, preferably, you look through the reprint, but if you're tempted to look through the original, please don a glove, okay? They're very fashionable. Next, please, Ben. Some acknowledgements. Most of my information has come from, primarily from newspapers and magazine reports that were written about Vanagas and the evolution of the museum. From the Lobethal Archives itself, from Vanagas' self-bound book, which we'll come to later on. I visited the Lithuanian Archives at St. Peter's in South Australia, and thanks to Dana Portius, their archivist, who gave me some information. And I also had the pleasure of just recently speaking to Violetta Vanagas. I think she's gone back to her maiden name after separating from her husband, who's the niece of Jonas and is one of the last real bloodlines left from that family. Next, please, Ben. So, who is this bloke? Jonas Vanagas, born in March 1916, passed away in 1989. No one knows where he's buried. I've set the Lithuanian archive people on a task and they can't find where he's buried. I've done some web searches and all sorts of stuff, but we can't find where he's buried. That's an interesting one. Could be. Could well be. I would hazard a guess that, no, I'll leave that one. Okay, nationality, obviously he's Lithuanian, and according to some newspaper articles, he's the son of a director of a Lithuanian railways. His wife, Claudia Ona, born Jabarkas on 10th February 1925, also Lithuanian. She died in 2013, and she's interred up at Enfield. So why he's not there with her, I don't know. They got married in 1945 in Denmark, and we'll get to that story as to why possibly that occurred. And they lived in Denmark from 44 to 49. Their son, Vitaltus, was born in 46 in Copenhagen, and he died in 85. Ben, please. While he was in Lithuania, and then later on when he moved to Denmark, he was very heavily involved in the scouting movement and also worked for the Red Cross. He retreated from the Bolsheviks after the Russians occupied Lithuania. He also retreated a little bit, from what I can understand from his niece, that the threat of the Germans occupying Lithuania started their thoughts about moving out of Lithuania, but the thought of the Russians, the Bolsheviks coming through later on after the Nazis were repelled was also a big risk or a threat to them, so they fled. In Denmark, he worked there as a bookbinder, and apparently that's where he learnt the skills of doing his own bookbinding and self-publication of documents. And even while he was in Denmark, he was involved with the Scouts, the Red Cross as well. Thanks, Ben. Came to Australia. Not all the slides are like this. It gets a little bit more exciting later on. Came to Australia, arrived in Melbourne on the Nellie, 15th of July 1949. Later on, came to Lobethal in November and was there until around about May 1957. Articles say that he went to West Croydon and lived from May after leaving Lobethal, where he worked in the textile industry as a weaver at Actal, and that kind of followed on from his kind of like shift work that he was doing at the Onkaparinga Woollen Mill in Lobethal. And then later on, he worked at the Griffin Press. He's described as a calm, hard-working man whom most Lobethal citizens knew. And depending on talking to some of the committee people, it depended on who you're talking to. Some thought he was a bit strange. This gentleman knocking on doors, asking for historical information and artefacts. But some people grew to admire and like him as well. Thanks, Ben. When they moved to Lobethal, we've got some conflicting stories about where they stayed. Jonas and his wife and their young son to start off with, and even his brother, sister-in-law and Violetta, his niece, also lived in Lobethal for a while. Violetta says that they lived in a room in the old hostel that was on the main street of Lobethal, that's now demolished. But other sources say that they lived in accommodation that the Onkaparinga Woollen Mill built for migrants in a series of cheap buildings down opposite the Woollen Mill on the Lenswood Road, if you know Lobethal at all. There's an old brick lunch house that was called many years ago, but it's now a office of a business, and apparently some of the migrant families lived in that for a bit as well. But Violetta reckons they lived in this thing here. And later on we'll learn that Jonas stored his stuff in one of the rooms, but it's now demolished. Thanks, Ben. His niece, Violetta Vanagas, she was born in Lobethal to Jonas's brother Vytautas and sister-in-law Mariages. She said that you pronounce Jonas as in Jonas, and later on he was often called John. And Vanagas means hawk, which is an interesting thing because I don't know if you have used Google Translate for anything, but it's great. And it gives you an idea of what people are saying in various languages. So it can even translate Lithuanian as one of the languages, and often reading through some of the documents after the translation, it says, and Hawk did such and such and so and so. And you're going, oh, hang on a second, what's going on here? But apparently she confirmed that in Lithuanian it means hawk. She said that her uncle was a collector. From the earliest memories, she always remembers him as being interested in reading, interested in history, and interested in collecting. He worked at the mill, but she said he had a lot of days off because he was out collecting stuff. Okay? Thanks, Ben. He never sought praise in Violetta's eyes. She herself said that he, Vanagas, was surprised that the residents of Lobethal didn't appreciate their German heritage, which is interesting because later on, I'll get onto that later on as well. And just as an aside, he never learnt to drive, so his wife Claudia did most of the driving around the place. So if he needed to go and visit the Mullers over at Neudorf, she would take him. And consequently, because of his experience in his homeland, he was fervently anti-communist. Now, what bearing that hat on is Lobethal stuff, I don't know. Thanks, Ben. There's an article that we'll get onto a little bit more detailed later on, but in a scrapbook that I've compiled of significant newspaper articles around Lobethal, article here, migrants bid to rescue South Australian history, or resurrect, South Australian history. A very complimentary article about Vanagas' work. Describes him as a cultural idealist, describes how he befriended local doctor CC, Cliff Jungfer, Dr. Jungfer, I can remember, with his little moustache and his little black beret going around making house calls. Jungfer encouraged and supported Vanagas' work, and that seems to be a common thread that comes up a lot in the articles and reports. He introduced Vanagas to men in influential positions, and we'll get onto that later. The article then goes into how Vanagas was known for his green corduroy jacket, and described him as plump-featured, pipe-smoking. And that relates to Violetta towards the end of the discussion saying that Vanagas actually died of cancer and attributed it to the fact that he was such a heavy pipe smoker. Obviously, being Lithuanian, he had an idea about German, but the article described it that he was laboured German and a hesitant English speaker. And some of the things that we'll get onto later on emphasise the fact that he would prefer to have spoken German. And a lot of his correspondence was in either Lithuanian, mostly in German, some in English. Thanks, Ben. So we get on to just a few other little things about his personal, private life away from Lobethal as we build up to Lobethal. Again, I don't expect you to read, but just to give you an idea that he was given a certificate, a letter of thanks, and a wish for peace and a bond of friendship from the Polish Scout movement in 1945. Thanks, Ben. Dear Lithuanians, we wish you the best wishes for the future of Lithuanians in Denmark and all over the world, 1946. A little certificate from an authority there. Thanks, Ben. A letter of thanks and appreciation from the Danish Scout movement, saying that Vanagas led the movement there since 1945. Thanks, Ben. And the Lithuanian Archives at St. Peter's have got some of his Scout medals as well. Okay. Thanks, Ben. So, they decide that they want to emigrate, and they apply for the Displaced Persons Scheme. That's the letter, that's what it looks like. Next slide, please, Ben. And I've tried to blow it up, hopefully, so you can see, Dear Madam. I don't know who it was addressed to initially, but it talks about how Jonas, Claudia, Vitautas, and Marasia were all granted displaced person status. Thanks, Ben. And then later on, once they got to Australia, we jump a couple of years, but we'll go back. A couple of years later, they get a letter of authority to remain in Australia. Thanks, Ben. So, they arrive, and family, as it said earlier slide, from the Nelly, and they come to Lobethal in 49. Like most migrants, or New Australians as they were called back then, they had a short stay at Inverbrackie, or the Woodside Migration Centre, which is the army camp, some of you might know. Okay, stayed there for a short while, but then both he and his wife and the other Vanagas people, they find employment at the Lobethal Woollen Mill. In Carol Brockhoff's book, Onkaparinga, The Story of a Mill, she spends, at the back, she's got a list of employees, and Jonas and Claudia were employed from October 49-57, and Claudia from 49 to 57. Next slide. She also goes on to say that several, talking about migrants, New Australians, several were housed in the mill's dining room across the road. The mill put up temporary houses for others, and some married couples, like Mr. and Mrs. Vanagas, lived on in the hostel for a time. So that kind of confirms that up the road, the mill is down like the southern end of Lobethal Main Street. The hostel is more uphill towards the north, getting close to the Rising Sun Hotel. If you've been to Lobethal and the Lobethal Bakery at the moment, directly across the road was where the hostel used to be. It's now entrance to the retirement village. Okay? She also goes on, Jonas Vanagas, a Lithuanian government official driven out by the Russian invasion, used all his powers of persuasion, his energy and his determination to collect and preserve Lobethal's historic treasures and stories. Thanks, Ben. Mr. Vanagas organised the material he collected in one of the front rooms of the Lobethal Centennial Hall. That's kind of incorrect. It was the Lobethal Institute Hall alongside, the first hall that was built in Lobethal. Later, it was moved to a new building in the Lutheran complex with Pastor Frischke's little college enclosed within it. Thanks, Ben. So he becomes interested in local history. The next slide will show a letter from Pastor Hebert, is it pronounced? Hebert? So we'll get onto that in a second. And he starts his quest collecting items and stories and stores them in a room in the hostel, which my first source says was across from the mill. He makes contact with Dr. Jungfer, who encourages Vanagas and introduces him to other influential people. Thanks, Ben. So there's the letter. Again, I don't expect you to read it because it's too small, but what I took out of the letter was that in Lobethal, the old German settlement, I grew to love Lobethal when I learned about the past of this town. He also requests materials for his work so that Lobethal's story is not forgotten. I have decided to summarise the history in words and pictures. He requests to Hebert, I ask you for help in a small way. Do you have some historical photos? Do you have some samples of handwriting of Pastor Frischke, as well as one of the first school teachers of the Lutheran school, Muller? Do you have any, he says, and if I interpreted or translated this correctly, he said, do you have any descriptions about Lobethal? Everything should be in German. So it gave me the impression that to start off with, this publication that he was going to produce, in keeping with the German theme, was going to be in German. But that obviously changed. He also asks and mentions that, like Mengi, mentioned in Hebert's book, Pastor Frischke at Lobethal was teaching the first theology students in Hebrew. And we've got in the seminary or college a little display cabinet. It's got some of the student texts that they used, and one of them indeed is in Hebrew. Okay. So the collection grows. He, for example, he writes away to the Postmaster General inquiring about who the postmasters were. Again, I won't expect you to read the letter. Thanks, Ben. He gets a letter from the Minister of Education of the time, Baden Patterson, to Vanagas, complimenting him on the fine work in collecting material for a book. So words got out already that, the book that he's produced is becoming well known. And interestingly, he says, what you have done could well serve as a guide to other districts and an unselfish task. And we might revisit those comments later on. Around about the same time of having produced the book and establishing some connections with Jungfer and some other prominent Lobethal citizens, he's involved with producing a book and also starting to put out little exhibitions. And so he spent in this one, in 55, he works in the woolen mill. He spent 3 years gathering information, pictures and other exhibits. One exhibit is a model of a ship which brought the first Lobethal settlers to South Australia. And then we come to the book. So he publishes this in 54, and it's, okay, it very rarely comes out of the display cabinet, so you're very lucky. And it's self-bound. Each page is covered with tissue paper, and he types up all the dialogue, sticks it on the page, spends hours getting copies of pictures, illustrations. Now, I'm sure they didn't have photocopy machines back in the day, so it's interesting to be seeing how he actually did that. Must have spent a bit of money getting, photographic copies of such things. And again, later on, if you want to have a look at the extent of what he's done, by all means, have a thumb through the reprint. Thanks, Ben. So he called it the Historical and Documentary Collection of Lobethal in South Australia, 1842 to 1854. Thanks, Ben. And as again, he's got pictures that he's had duplicated, copied, and under each picture he's typed the little, what do you call it? Caption, thank you. All right. Back one, too quick. He was meticulous. Now this is, I think, what Lois was interested in, the process that he went through. He was meticulous. So in his book, he also published or recorded in this little number here, everything that he put in the book, he has recorded in handwriting here. So you've got page number, what the item is, copy or originals, who the possessor of the originals were, who contributed it, what reference, and any kind of remarks. So he was meticulous, and there are a number of pages. Okay? You can have a flip through that later on as well. Around about the same time, as I mentioned, citizens, some prominent Lobethal citizens were becoming, well, I think they were always interested, they just needed a little bit of a prod. And so they decided to form a historical society, and that was reported in a couple of the newspapers, in the Advertiser 1954. That's okay, Ben, yeah, that's fine. When the idea of this historical society is formed, Vanagas becomes obviously a part of that. I don't expect you to read the letter, it's just about, he writes to the committee that he's a part of and offers a range of suggestions. So for me, that's pretty ballsy, that's pretty confident for a new Australian coming into a community. So he says, forming a historical society, it was good, but he wanted to organise a small party to outline the work done and explain for the community. He wanted to explain the historical society's direction. He wanted to present to the public his historical study. He wanted to recruit members to the society. He wanted the press to come and cover the events of that event, that party. And he wanted to invite representatives from the Public Library of South Australia. Next one, thanks, Ben. He even wanted to develop a film script for the history of Lobethal using Clara Serena music playing in the background. Now in case you don't know, Clara Serena Kleinschmidt later became Mellish. She married her pianist accompanist that went with her when she became famous, and she was a contralto opera singer, went to London, became quite famous. You can get her recordings now on the State Library of South Australia. You can download them, they're all been digitised. Or you can come up and, if you've got an old gramophone, and play the 78s at Lobie. So he wanted that playing in the background to his film script. He wanted to produce posters to advertise the event, and then use those posters later on to advertise the collections, so that you can attract tourists in the summer. And he wanted photographs to sell to customers. So the next big thing was kind of like the debut, where he goes public with everything. And it happened in 1955 when the college was celebrating its 100 years of the graduation of the three students, Oster, Strempel and Hensel. And during all the celebrations, after the church services, while there were things going on, one of the things that happened was that Vanagas displayed his collection and arranged by Vanagas of Lobethal. It was display unique in the history of Lobethal and roused great interest. Many of these exhibits will be placed in the Lobethal College when it's converted into a historical museum. So back in 55, they were thinking that this little tiny one-room, wattle and daub, mud-walled thing was going to house his collection that was too big for his room in his hostel room, and pretty soon outgrew the room at the Lobethal Institute. Oh yeah, you could have fitted it upstairs, yeah. I forgot about that, you know, just shift the beds of the students and whatever, those that stayed there. So, Brockhoff in her book mentioned that the museum or the display was in the Centennial Hall, which is the big building on the right. Everything that I've learnt, everyone that I know says that it was in the Institute building. The windows to the left of the building was the room that he displayed his stuff. So it doesn't look like that anymore. It's got safety ramp access and a couple of trees growing out the front, but it's still there. Yep, thanks Ben. Again, like I said, the collection kept on growing, and Jungfer also became involved. The letter, again, I don't expect you to read, to the Public Library of South Australia. One of the collections that Vanagas and Jungfer found was a handwritten, it wasn't really an exercise book, but put together document, and it obviously had something to do with geology. And everyone thought at the time, just like a few people just recently have thought, that maybe it belonged to Mengi, that Mengi had written this manuscript. But unfortunately, Jungfer found from the archivist at the public library, doing a writing comparison, that it's not similar, and therefore the manuscript wasn't written by Mengi, must have been written by one of Frischke's students, because they studied everything. Okay, thanks Ben. So, the collection got so big, they decided that they needed to have another room, and that's where the Lobethal Institute came in. And so Vanagas, Jungfer, Dearman, Schubert, and a few other names, they all got together and decided eventually that they were going to put it all in the Institute, and invitations were issued out for Sunday, May, yep, 1956. Yep, thank you. Thanks, Ben. And so some of the display things, like this huge model ship built by Martin Hansen in 1874, features in some of the old black and white photos, but we can't find it. We don't know where it's gone. And that's one of the dilemmas of doing this stuff just recently, is that you find stuff that's gone. But that's what the room kind of looked like. And a lot of this stuff was made by Vanagas. It was donated by various people, various organisations. You know, the shield there in the corner was a pruning championship shield. The trophy was a local golf trophy, but you can see all of the other frames that are displayed, particularly the one closest to the corner above by the sail ship. Vanagas did that. So in his spare time, he would put this stuff together, copies, get copies of pictures, put them into display frames, and so on and so forth, as well as collecting stuff from other people. At the opening, the three musketeers got together, Vanagas, Dr. Jungfer, and Thomas Playford, and that's a promotional photo that often occurs in a lot of the newspaper releases after 56. And that's obviously taken in the corner of the Institute Museum as well. Thanks, Ben. Just some more pictures. A frame that was made after the event, but still shows the collections and how it was set out in that little room. Thanks, Ben. There was a plaque that the Society made up and displayed in the room. One of the old photographs, you can actually see it, but now that the museum has moved up to its current site, and since Vanagas has passed away, his dates of birth and death have been added. And again, being Lithuanian, he didn't leave out Lithuania. It wasn't all about Lobethal. Had some displays about Lithuania, and this little booklet, which ironically is in a frame so you can't open it up and have a look, but the Lithuanian Historical place at St. Peter's, they've got the exact same copy. And it's basically just a travel log of Lithuania, culture, history, you know, prominent people, so on and so forth, all in black and white. Thanks, Ben. Vanagas, in his green little book here, talks about how he developed a crest for Lobethal with the sailing ship, the Bible, the kangaroo with the Southern Cross. His total imagination and devising. Another photo of Vanagas that you see regularly in newspaper articles. I don't know if you can see, but in the top one, Vanagas is standing there. He's got that ship, the model of the ship, most probably that Hansen made in 1874. Vanagas is sitting there with a pipe and an open flame lighting his pipe. Now, can you imagine many archivists doing that now? So, like, you know, I get told off if I take a document or a photograph into the lunchroom at the Lithuanian Archives. You know, get out of there, get out of there, take it out, take it out. I mean, he's lighting up his pipe. You can imagine. Drop the match and away she goes. We go back to the article that I mentioned earlier on in the presentation. A very complimentary article about the opening of the Institute Museum. Fortunately for Vanagas and the community, he found someone who realised the significance of his enterprise. It was a local doctor, C.C. Jungfer, who in turn won the interest of influential public men such as the local Member of Parliament, Mr. Shannon, the Minister of Education, Mr. Patterson, the Principal Librarian of the Public Library, Mr. H. Bridson, and the Deputy Director of Education, Mr. G.S. MacDonald. So he was able to recruit a lot of people, but I also think it was a lot to do with his connections with Dr. Jungfer as well. The event was reported in Lithuanian. I don't expect you to read the article. One, because it's too small. Two, it's in Lithuanian, unless you're Lithuanian, of course. But it basically just regurgitates everything that was written in the advertiser article. Again, the most popular person in Lobethal, again, talking about the whole thing about where he came from, why he was there, what he did, and the opening of the Institute. It just reports on everything that I just said then. It refers to author Stuart Coburn's comments that the stuff that he was doing, the book that he's produced and the collection was of great importance of the work, and it's the first case in Australia where a new Australian concerned himself with such a task. Again, another one. Thanks, Ben. All right, and then this is another interesting one, and I'm sure this is the crux of what Lois was wanting me to talk about as well. This book, so not only did he produce the 54 public thing, he produced this book here, like I said, and in here he's kept everything that he went through to produce the book and then to get the museum up and running, to the point where he's got notes. He's kept notes from Dr. Jungfer. Dear Mr. Vanagas, Mr. Schubert, hang on. Thank you, that's better. Mr. Schubert and myself are to meet the Historical Committee of the Concordia on Sunday, June the 5th at Concordia College at 2 p.m. We would like you to come with your book. Please see me Saturday about 11 a.m. and come and see me Saturday at so-and-so. He's kept all of those notes in this book, as well as some other stuff as well that we'll get to. Thanks, Ben. In the book, he talks about, there's a copy of his little speech, which was in German, and I had it, again, Google translated it for me to basically say, permit me to speak in German, which is the language of the founders of this town, Lobethal in South Australia. These pioneers did a lot of good for this town and South Australia, so that their past is not forgotten. I wrote the history of Lobethal in words and pictures from the year it was founded in 1842 to 54. I also created the Historical People's Museum in Lobethal. I mean, if Google translated it correctly, that's a pretty bold statement to say for a new Australian too, I reckon. But he said it. For the completion of this historical work, I would first like to thank my friend, Dr. Clifford Jungfer, as well as everyone else who helped me in this work. Thanks, Ben. Inside the book, he writes a timeline of things that he did. Thanks, Ben. And again, I won't go through it all, but 52 he did this. 53, out of my own interest, I started a book in German about the history of Lobethal. In 54, I come in contact with many people outside Lobethal. It talks about his contact with Thingo, Jungfer. 55, I collected historical artefacts, so on and so forth. Received congratulations from former Minister of Education, from Dr. Van Abbe, University of Adelaide, as well as Dr. C.E. Hoopman, General President of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Australia. So on. More the things that he did. In 56, 6th of May, the historical museum I built was opened by the Premier, Mr. T. Playford. Officially opened, over 1,000 visitors were present. So he is involved in producing the book. He's involved with a number of people to get his collection on display in the Institute. He has this big opening. If you remember back at one stage, he got a letter from Patterson saying that what he's doing would serve as a model for other communities. I think Vanagas took that to heart and pretty much wrote, some of the draft letters are in this green book. He wrote to member Toisner, a member of Angus, and basically offered himself and promoted himself as worthy of having a job to do in other small German communities what he did for Lobethal. But, typical politician speak, his reply was circled down the bottom, "I shall be pleased to communicate with you as soon as I have any further information." So, it leads on to something later on, but Lobethal still celebrates Vanagas, and they decide to hold this grand concert, which not only has local performers, Australian English performers, but after the interval down the bottom half, I don't expect you to see, but believe me, they have Lithuanian chorus, male choir, and Lithuanian folk dancers as well. Thanks, Ben. So we get to the point where no sooner was the Institute Museum opened and Vanagas submit his resignation and indicate that it's time for him to move on. Now, was that because he felt like he got knocked back by Toisner for this job? Or did he just really think that my job's done, Anyhow, he writes away to Chief Librarian, "Regret to inform you this day, I hereby tender my resignation." Next one, Ben. And then he gets a little bit poetic. It's written in German again, Google Translate. It says, highlighted, "With the extinguishing of the Olympia fire in Melbourne, I am also leaving my further historical work in Lobethal." He writes a letter to the committee, again in German, but he leaves instructions, okay? Which again I think is pretty bold. "Please do not touch the exhibits. Please respect my artistic historical work. Don't forget that most of the items in the museum are already 100 years old. Do not leaf through my book." He sent a list of exhibit items, and I'll show you an example, a faint example of that later on, and says, "No one is entitled to remove or borrow anything from the museum's holdings without receiving written permission from the committee management of the Lobethal Archives and Historical Museum." I wish some people that were involved in the museum between that letter being written and me taking over, I wish they'd read that. I think some things went walking, but I'm not pointing the finger at anyone. So with his letter of resignation, with his demands, he submits a list of 93 items in total. It's too faint to read. So, for example, number 7, model of the church buildings at Lobethal, the model was built in 1860. It's one of those like box diorama things, deep, and it's 3D type model. A map of South Australia with the trail used by the pioneer women, just like the Hahndorf women walked their trail. Same with Lobethal, they walked their trail through Lenswood Basket Range down to McGill. picture of Her Majesty, so on and so forth. 3 pages, 93 items in total. He also submits some of his labels that he had on items display. For example, feather flowers made by Miss S.L. Reuter. This work was awarded a silver medal at the All Australian Exhibition in Adelaide in 1930, donated by Mrs. S.L. Reuter. Now, some of those original little labels still exist. They're still wired onto the pegboard under some of the items. Again, lots of praise afterwards. Letter of congratulations and best wishes for the future from Minister Baden-Patterson, the same bloke that said your work can serve as a model for future communities. But he does describe it as pioneering work in founding the museum collection. And it's interesting to note at this stage, by May 57, the letter is addressed to him up in the corner, care of the Griffin Press, Advertiser Newspapers Limited. So he's moved away from Lobethal, he's in Adelaide. Lots of articles from various places. Finsbury Man delves in South Australian history. Again, just regurgitates everything from other newspaper reports. Thanks, Ben. So we get on to now things that have been happening behind the scenes and deal with the old college. So many of you would have seen an image similar to that. Not much has changed except with a poor whitewash and some of the wooden shingles are missing. Thanks, Ben. Advertiser in 59 says the old seminary is saved, that the seminary will be housed inside a new archives. No mention of Vanagas in that report at all. Thanks, Ben. In 59, the college is in a fair bit of disrepair. It's been fenced off. It's got a roof on it to try to protect it, but there is a gate, and just recently talking to Kevin Kleeman, the retired undertaker at Lobie, he related stories about how they used to collect sticks and stones and bottles and stuff and store it in the room there, but also play hide and seek in the museum. Thanks, Ben. So behind the scenes, something's happening, and we'll find out later that some people have been at work, and this museum has been planned to be built around the old college and seminary to shift Vanagas's work. A program's drawn up for 1969. I think I've got this a little bit out of order. Next one, thanks, Ben. Let's just go back. They decide they're going to do this. 1960, the foundation stone laying ceremony is held in Lobethal. Big affair. Baden-Patterson setting the stone, and some of you might recognise some of the church people there, I don't know, but Thomas Playford, so on, the dignitaries. And it was a big affair, lots of people, bands playing, but I can't remember it. I was only 4 years old at the time. Lois, she reckons she was there. I can't see anywhere, Lois. Yeah, big event. Newspaper report, again from the Advertiser. Mr. Patterson congratulated the instigator, Mr. Jonas Vanagas, on his wonderful achievement. Thanks. Now we're back to 61, where the building's complete. Another ceremony of opening with Minister Downer arriving with Chairman Schubert of the LA&HM committee. Can we just go back, Ben? The lady behind wearing the hat with the collared dress and stuff, that's Mrs. Miller. They owned the farm at Noidoff, just over the western slope. They've got the only hops farm left in South Australia on their property. But they emptied their sheds and stuff when Vanagas found out about them. And so a lot of the stuff that's in the museum is from the Miller homestead. Dignitaries, Vanagas, and I would presume his wife Claudia. Where? What? Who?
Oh, I just recognised my grandpa and my grandma.
Which ones?
Well, Fred Place is the one who third in from the left.
Oh.
No, go back. Third from the left.
Third from the left.
There's a man.
Yeah.
And
Wearing glasses?
Yeah, wearing glasses, that's Fred Blaze.
Yeah.
And alongside of him is his wife, Grandma Blaze.
All right, there you go. Merry Christmas. There you go. How old were you then? Oh, really? Hang on. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Thanks, Ben. The minister opening, speech. Thanks. And then Tom Playford presenting Vanagas with the key. And then the ceremonial opening the door of the museum with Vanagas. Next, thanks, Ben. And then some of the exhibits moved into the new area. It was pretty spacious at that stage still. Now we've got no wall space left. It's pretty crowded. Next, Ben. Moving scene at the museum opening. I've highlighted what we're going to talk about, so next slide please, Ben. Excerpt from the article, Dr. F.J.H. Blaze told us some of the early moves for a suitable place to house the collection. He says, our church was greatly worried as to how to preserve the old college. Some people thought that the best thing was to engage a bulldozer and flatten it. Okay. Another one. The museum took shape largely through the efforts of Mr. Jonas Vanagas, who migrated from Lithuania in Lobethal in 1949. Again, another article, again from the Advertiser. They must have had their own little newsletter, the Advertiser PI. And again, that photograph of him setting fire to the sailing ship and regurgitating everything about what we've learnt so far. So nothing new's coming out about him. A lamp for the archives got reported on, and this is an interesting one because we start to see a little bit of what happened behind the scenes during that time. So again, highlighted, May 15, 1954, Jungfer, Vanagas and Blaze meet in the archives room at Concordia College and conceive a plan to erect a building which would enclose the college and house the Vanagas collection. It was a vision which people thought impossible. However, just 7 years later, the building, 42 foot by 32, is erected and completed. The college has been renovated, so they reckon, and forms the central exhibit of the museum. Vanagas has moved away, but even still, in '62, the LAM committee are going to him because they take possession of some display cabinets and cases from the Adelaide Museum, and they're asking Vanagas to come back if he's got time to help with the arrangement and presentation of the museum exhibit after the new display cases arrive from the Adelaide Museum. So they're going back to him and asking him to come along and still be involved. We're getting towards the end now where he's moved away and we still find stuff being printed. This is a softcover book we hold in the museum, published in 1962. Thanks, Ben. And it's got a spread, again in Lithuanian, about Vanagas, our pictures of the museum, our picture of the three main spearheads of the movement, looking through Vanagas's book. Again, Vanagas, the little pen picture there with his pipe, always with his pipe. Thanks. But he's also still involved with the community. He gets, and the Lithuanian Archives have got these copies of these certificates, again in Lithuanian, certificate of thanks to Scout Jonas Vanagas, to the worker of Lithuanian Scout in exile, to the head of the Danish Lithuanian Scouts, Tuntos Buklos, guardian of the Scout experience and founder of the Lobethal Museum. So, fair high appreciation. Another one from the Australian Lithuanian community, spreader of the Lithuanian name among foreigners, who tirelessly works for the Lithuanian community in a field where there are so few workers. Thanks, Ben. A sporting team had arrived and Vanagas was a consultant and almost like chaperone, so he was given a certificate of thanks from the Australian Life Sports Board. He was instrumental in setting up the Lithuanian Archives and Museum at 3rd Avenue, St. Peter's. And with the arrival, on the opening of the Lithuanian Centre, he takes Mr. Bukunas, whose centre picture, with his hand up to his moustache, he's from Chicago. But you note, if you look carefully at the picture, Vanagas is dressed in his scout uniform. He's wearing his scout toggle and so on. Vanagas, West Croydon, organised a museum along the lines of a similar building he built at Lobethal. That comes from an article. Thanks, Ben. There's a newsletter from, let me see here, it's from the Good Neighbour Council newsletter. There's a spread in this produced in 1975. Yep. And it goes about, and Vanagas talks about how you go around setting up museums, what you should be doing. So he's become a bit of a go-to person in this article. He's even mentioned in the Lobethal Valley of Prage Heritage Study, produced in '83, that says this half-timbered building has survived, talking about the seminary college. It was saved by the sterling efforts of Jonas Vanagas, a Lithuanian migrant who settled in Lobethal after the Second World War. And as we get close to the finish, I found it important that I acknowledge the work of Dr. Junkfer, doing a search on Trove newspapers, if you know Trove at all, a newspaper online archive place. A lot of the articles that I found around the museum also talked about Dr. Junkfer. Way back in 1932, the 90th celebration of the Lutheran Church in Lobethal, he was involved in a display of pioneer relics. So it was happening before Vanagas came, but Junkfer and Vanagas together basically spearheaded the movement. Vanagas is on a few websites, the History Network website, the Sauerpunkt website was set up by a past curator of the Lobethal Museum. We can't access it because he won't let us, so stuff doesn't get posted on that website very much. South Australian History Hub has got some stuff about Vanagas, so on. Next slide, thanks Ben. More websites. So if you search around, you can find some stuff, but it becomes a bit repetitive. You're reading the same stuff. Thanks. So very quickly, the museum in 2024, I've counted over 3,000 items now, some big, some small, things from suppository makers to a coin that's got 1 mark. It's written 1 mark. Now, being Lutheran, you'd think that 1 mark is a German coin, yeah? But if you look carefully, it's got S, capital S dot, capital A dot, capital G dot. Now, Google image search is wonderful because you can take a picture of it, throw it across, and this coin isn't a German Deutschmark, it's a McGill Boys Reformatory Good Behaviour coin. And it was issued in 1s, 5s, 10s and 20s. And so if you were a good boy, you got these marks. And obviously if you accumulate enough marks, you got some kind of reward. The question is, who in Lobethal was naughty enough to go to McGill, but good enough to get a mark? Stuff like that. So rediscovering lost provenance, stuff that I was just talking about. We're recording and registering all items digitally and their locations, so we know where they are. Even if they're not being displayed, they're stored in the box in the office, numbered 3, so on and so forth. We talk about balancing the preservation of items with a meaningful display, stuff that Ben Hollister and I often talk about when I'm down there on Thursdays and we bump into each other. And our most recent project is the preservation and restoration of the college, which unfortunately is slowly falling to pieces. but we've engaged the services of a guy called Keith McAllister, who's a restoration expert. He's too expensive for us to pay to do it himself. Our grant monies were only $4,000, and so he's consented to cut his costs right back and operate a 3-day workshop and teach us and show us what we need to do to preserve it. So, you know, we're always looking for money. We're a volunteer, as you know, volunteer organisation. You know, we've bumped our price up to try to get more funds, but it's hard to get money from organisations where there are so many other worthy causes. So that's where we're at 2024. That's Vanagas. That's what he's left us with. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Now, has anybody got any questions for our speaker tonight? If I can just bring the microphone up here so that we can get a good recording of it.
Not really a question, but a comment. When my mother came visiting from Germany in '78, I took her and the children there, and I can quite remember how we doodled over all the things in there. Thank you.
Just a brief question. Did you ever find a picture of Pastor Fritcher?
No, no.
Nobody else has either.
We've talked about that with Lois, the expert here, and there doesn't appear to be one, does there, Lois?
Andrew, I've just got a comment from Facebook that's directed to you. A shout out to my old PE teacher at Murray Bridge High, Mr. Zilm. Sounds like a very interesting presentation. That's from Sharina Morton. So you obviously made an impression on at least one student.
Oh, goodness. Thanks, Sheree. Look at that.
Okay, Morris.
Oh, dear. I wonder if she's a real person.
I got a phone call from my brother-in-law, Edward Shell, who is a citizen of Lobethal, and he said, "Are you going to this function tonight?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, I'm really looking forward to it, and I'll be watching the whole lot, so I thought you'd be interested."
Oh, thanks for that. Thank you. I hope she didn't fall asleep.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? If not, I'll call on Chris Lockwood to move a vote of thanks.
Hi, Andrew. I'd like to thank you for a most interesting talk. I found it very interesting at a number of levels. I found it interesting from the point of view of the life of a post-war refugee. But I found it particularly inspirational that he should come here and spend so much time and effort and show such passion for the heritage of people other than, heritage not his own. And I think that's an inspiration for all of us to take our own heritage more seriously and treasure it more. I've been out to the museum there a number of times, mostly with international visitors, particularly students from places like Papua New Guinea or Indonesia, because I thought it was interesting for them to see how we started off, that we haven't always been rich and successful, that our seminary started in such a humble form, and I thought that might be some encouragement to them to see that other people have had to work and struggle too. But since hearing your talk, I'm inspired to go and have a look a bit more in depth at some of the other exhibits there. And of course, Jonas hasn't been the only non-Lutheran, non-German that have helped to, he's not the only one that's helped to preserve our heritage. I understand that in Harndorf there have been people that are of non-German ancestry that have helped preserve the history there, and you're of German ancestry but not Lutheran ancestry. Oh, Lutheran ancestry, but you're not a Lutheran yourself. but yet you've done so much also to help preserve our heritage, and I thank you for that.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Here's another little thing.
Oh, Shlukov. Thanks very much, Jeff.
Good, thank you, Andrew. I've known Andrew from past times. As many of you know, I belong to the Nain Church, and that's the home church of the Zilm family. And there's lots of Zilms buried in those cemeteries, and the Zilm family history book has got a drawing of one of the churches at Nain, and Andrew's taken a keen interest in that as well. So thank you for all the work that you continue to do, and we really need volunteers like you to sort of keep things on track. So good luck for whatever you might do. So that sort of brings us to the end of tonight's meeting, and as Lois mentioned before, there's lots of History Month activities coming up next month. I'm involved a little bit too, and I'm giving a very short presentation at the GHRG seminar. The other big day at Tanunda, I just happen to be treasurer of that organisation. And then the Wind Sorb Society have got a meeting in May too, and would you believe they've asked me to be guest speaker? So my presentation there is at the history fair is in relation to the Wendish migration from Germany to America and South and Australia, and particularly reference to my BIR or BR ancestry, and the talk at the Wind Sorb Society will elaborate more on that, because in 1854 one brother went from Germany to America and the other one from Germany to Australia, 2 months apart, and never saw each other again. But the families did maintain contact, and I'll be sort of elaborating on that. So that, I haven't got the date, it's a Sunday afternoon, Lyle, at Glynde Homes. 18th, whatever Sunday is around that time. Okay, so look, thank you all for your attendance here tonight. You're welcome to stay for supper over in the church hall. You're welcome to have a look at this material, but just use gloves if you want to look through that one book, and I'm sure Andrew would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So, safe travelling home in this rain. I'm not too sure how much you had here, but coming from the Barossa, I had the wipers on nearly the whole time until I got to Adelaide. But by the time I get out in the car here, the streets are probably dry. Okay, so enjoy the rest of the evening's fellowship. Thank you.
Hang on. Okay, ready? Yeah. Here we go. Thank you.
Don't break.